This episode of The Ready Room is brought to you by the Star Trek Starships Collection from Eaglemoss, the ultimate collection officially authorized by CBS Studios featuring vessels from 50 years of Star Trek. Each is expertly sculpted, hand-painted, and comes with an authoritative collector's magazine. Start your collection today with the USS Enterprise 1701D for only $4.95 with free shipping. For details and to order, visit st-starships.com/readyroom. And by Audible.com, offering more than 150,000 titles for smartphone, tablet, and desktop. If you love podcasts, you're going to love Audible.com and the ability to read your favorite books, plus those you've been wanting to get to, while on the go or at work. To get a free audiobook of your choice, visit audibletrial.com/trekfm. And also by Enterprise in Space. Find out how you can help science and education and become a virtual crew member aboard the NSS Enterprise Orbiter. Visit enterpriseinspace.org for more details.
Hi, this is Michael Dorn, Lieutenant Commander Worf from Next Generation and Deep Space Nine, and you're listening to Trek FM.
Welcome to The Ready Room, show number 210, Disastrous Consequences. I'm Christopher Jones, and with me this week is Zachary Fruhling. We'll be talking about some Star Trek news, including the many panels and events in store for fans at Star Trek Mission New York. Then in the feature, we're joined by Rumman Chowdhury to discuss the Mirror Universe and the Deep Space Nine episode, Crossover. So let's step into The Ready Room. Hello, Zachary. I see that you have retaken the cot and you're back here in the Ready Room for another episode. How's everything going?
I'm doing great. Yeah, Mike had been taking my spot in the corner of the Ready Room for a while, so he's gone. I'm back in the Ready Room. It's great to be back.
He did, but last week when you and Mike were on your vacation together to Ryza, Bruce Gibson came in and he did a show with me.
Well, we're a sharing bunch around here. You know, the cot's open for grabs.
How was that vacation?
It was great. Always good to get to Ryza.
All right. Well, today we only have one news story that we're going to talk about here on the Ready Room, but there are a lot of elements to it. And then after that, we're going to be joined by Rumman Chowdhury for the first time on the Ready Room, as well as Brandon-Shea Mutala to talk about the Mirror Universe and DS9 and Crossover. But to get there, we have to go through New York. Mission New York, the convention coming up September 2nd through 4th in New York City. This is being put on by CBS and Reed Pop, and they've released the itinerary for the event, so we know who's going to be there, what the panels are going to be, and they have got some really, really cool stuff coming up. Zachary, you didn't go to Star Trek Las Vegas, right? Have you been to a big Star Trek convention before?
You know, I haven't. You know, I didn't really grow up going to the convention scene, and I couldn't make it to Star Trek Las Vegas this year. I had a change in job and had other things in life going on, so I couldn't make it this time around. It's on the calendar for next year, though. So if you want to meet me in Star Trek Las Vegas next year, anyone, then we'll do that next year. But no, so frankly, I haven't been to the convention scene very much. I've gone to a couple of small conventions, like there's a convention here near where I live in Sacramento called Sac Trek. I went to that last year. That was interesting. But so large conventions I haven't really done. I'm looking at the itinerary though, and there's stuff I wish I could be a part of. I mean, there's some wacky stuff like a stage table reading of Star Trek IV: The Voyage Home for its 30th anniversary. I wish I could be there for that. And,
that would be fun.
What I love looking at this itinerary though, Chris, I love there's just so much Star Trek action going on right now. You know, it's a great time to be a Star Trek fan. People are talking about so many interesting things. There's so many projects that people are doing. The proliferation of new media has made it possible for people to develop their own media, and there's so much going on. It's really exciting. I really have to make more of an effort to be a part of that scene.
Well, this one, as you said, has a lot of very interesting stuff going on. And we're going to run down everything for everyone right now. We'll touch on each of the items that they've released so far. And Friday, September 2nd is a day when I would really like to be there because they're going to be talking about the Wrath of Khan. And not only are they going to be doing that, but they have two of the most knowledgeable people about the Wrath of Khan who are going to be doing sessions. At 3:45 p.m., our friend John Tenuto, who has been here on the Ready Room many times to talk about Khan and elsewhere around the network, is going to be doing a panel called Behind the Scenes of Star Trek II, The Wrath of Khan. And if you think you know Khan and you haven't listened to John Tenuto before, I think you'll be really surprised about the things that you learn because he has researched that movie, Ricardo Montalban, Space Seed, the work of Nick Meyer, and everything surrounding Khan in a depth that I don't think anyone else has ever done because he actually got access to the Roddenberry archives and other materials and I think materials related to Nick Meyer as well, that most people haven't. And so it's going to be amazing, I know, what he has to say. And then after that, as if that's not good enough, after that, at 6:15 p.m., Nick Meyer is going to be there for a 4K remastered screening of The Wrath of Khan with a Q&A session. So if there's anyone who knows more about it than John Tenuto, it would be Nick Meyer, and they're both going to be there on the 2nd.
And what an opportunity to be able to do a Q&A session with Nick Meyer and be able to ask your deepest questions about the Wrath of Khan. I'm not one of these people who thinks that the Wrath of Khan is like the gold standard of Star Trek, like it, that's the best that ever was, the best there ever will be. Some people I think really think that about Star Trek too. It's definitely in my top list, but I think it's a mark of greatness that you can continue to circle back to a film that's 30 plus years old now and keep finding new material and keep asking new questions about it and keep mining it for greatness. It is one of the greats, and it's great we have the opportunity to pick the brains of the people who were involved.
By the way, if you want to go back and listen to those Ready Rooms that John was on and we talked about Khan, you can go back to the Ready Room 80, which is called Taking Out the Khan Baby. And that one is about the road to the Wrath of Khan. So John shares a lot of information about the making of the Wrath of Khan, a lot of behind the scenes stuff there. Larry Nemechek is also on that episode. And then there's episode 110 called A Fascinating Conversation. And this one we did after Into Darkness came out. And John came on and he talked to us about the origins of the character Khan, the Khan that we did not see in The Wrath of Khan, and how if you really know the history of this character and you really know the background to the development of Khan, the whole take in Into Darkness and the casting of Benedict Cumberbatch isn't quite as crazy as it seems on the surface. So again, the Ready Room 80 and 110, those are the two episodes that I highly recommend people go back and listen to, particularly if you're not going to be able to be there in New York for this really great behind-the-scenes session that John's going to do.
I think it would be so exciting to listen to Nick Meyer talk about Star Trek: The Wrath of Khan. I've listened to interviews with him and whatnot, but he's one of the great filmmakers. And, I've always had this kind of side interest in filmmaking. It's in another life, in a mirror universe. I might have been a filmmaker, and I love listening to filmmakers talk about filmmaking and, learning from this is just a chance to learn from one of the greats.
Yeah, absolutely. That's why I like buying DVDs and Blu-rays, getting those behind the scenes commentaries and discussions that they have. So moving on, the other thing on September 2nd is a comics panel at 6:45 p.m. So unfortunately, you're going to have to choose whether you're going to go to the Wrath of Khan screening or the comics panel. But it's going to be there with the editors and writers from IDW, who have, of course, been doing Star Trek Ongoing for a number of years now, and now the new Boldly Go series. And John Byrne is going to be there. And so that alone would be really fascinating. John Byrne, the great comic writer, not only in Star Trek, but elsewhere. And more recently, he's been doing those photo comics that IDW has been publishing. So that'll be really fascinating. On the 3rd, on Saturday, there's a lot going on. There's a session with the Smithsonian Air and Space Museum curator, Margaret Whiteamp, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing the last name there. And that's on restoring the USS Enterprise filming model. That's going to be at 12:15 p.m. on Saturday. And at 1:30, Mark Altman and guests are going to host a panel on the making of the animated series. And of course, we also had news come out recently that there's going to be a Blu-ray release of the animated series. Zachary, how do you feel about the original animated series?
It's, again, I feel like one of these terrible Star Trek fans where it's like, I didn't go to conventions and I didn't read the comic books very much and I didn't watch the animated series very much. So, but I think I'm excited in general that we keep going back to these older shows and trying to breathe new life into them. A Blu-ray release of the animated series, I mean, that's a high definition release. You'll see more subtlety in the animation that's there. You'll see a much closer vision of the artist's original intention. So, there's a part of me that's a historian. I like preserving these artifacts because if you don't preserve them now, in 50 years or 100 years, they're going to continue to degrade. And so the same is true of family photographs. The same is true of movies. Same is true of animation, right? So this is, in my mind, we're at the point where we need to be doing this sort of large scale digitization asset preservation project where, we need to preserve these things for future generations. So, whether or not, we've seen the original series, it's an important part of Star Trek history. It's an important part of our cultural history. So yeah, let's preserve it and make that the highest quality preservation we can. So I'm excited that companies are taking the time and effort and frankly, spending the money to do these types of releases.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. And every time you hear someone say, oh, why are they putting the animated series on Blu-ray? How about doing DS9 and Voyager instead? Well, yes, of course, they need to do DS9 and Voyager, but as you say, getting TAS preserved in the best quality possible is also important. So ultimately, I hope they do them all. But yeah, when you think about things that we've created over the past century as humans and as creators, thinking about that stuff disappearing because it wasn't well preserved, it actually is a risk, right?
And I don't know enough about the state of the assets themselves for the animated series. It strikes me that it might be something like low-hanging fruit, where if you're going to do Voyager and Deep Space Nine on Blu-ray, you're going to have to recreate special effects. You got 7 seasons to go through. You only have 1 season of the animated series. You probably don't have to rebuild special effects. You can hopefully just take the original animation, recapture it in a higher resolution, build it as a Blu-ray, and ship it out. So it just strikes me as really a low-hanging fruit that's worthwhile. If I were in their position, I'd do the same thing. If I wanted to, go through these shows systematically, I wouldn't start with the challenging episodes, like rebuilding all of Voyager in in Blu-ray. That seems really hard, but it's much easier to release an animated series Blu-ray.
Well, those shows from the 90s are quite challenging because of the way that they did the effects, and they were really intending it just to be on standard definition television.
Yeah, they composited it all in low resolution video versus high definition film. Yeah,
right, exactly. And so there is a challenge there. So you're right. Moving on Saturday, 3:30 p.m., this is another really cool panel. Nick Meyer and our friend Kirsten Beyer, the wonderful novelist who has breathed new life into the Voyager storyline through her novels. They are going to be together for a Q&A session about their history with the franchise and how they became involved in Star Trek Discovery, because Nick Meyer is, of course, on there as an EP and Kirsten Beyer as part of the writing staff. Kirsten is someone who we always love having on Literary Treks, and I know Matthew loves talking to Kirsten. And Matthew is someone who's not the biggest Voyager fan, but loves her Voyager novels. And that's why we've been so excited that she's part of the Discovery writing team. And this is going to be a fantastic opportunity for fans who are there in New York to actually hear her and Nick Meyer together talking about Star Trek and maybe getting a few little tidbits about Discovery.
Yeah, what a teaser this is. I mean, we're right around the corner from Star Trek Discovery. It's so exciting. We want to get as much information as we can. We know they've assembled a top-notch team to work on Star Trek Discovery. Where I think, as from a fan standpoint, we're just dying for information, and we know that these are the people that can create great Star Trek in some way. It's very exciting. I wish I could be there to hear what they had to say, of course, but this is just, it's tantalizing. You want to know as much as you can about what's coming. You know these people are going to deliver something great.
Well, and it's awesome that, say, someone like Kirsten, it's the first time she's going to be sitting down talking about Star Trek as a member of the writing team for Star Trek on television. It's going to be very, very cool. Moving on Saturday, 5 p.m., there is a staged table reading, as you mentioned earlier, of The Voyage Home for the 30th anniversary. I think that's going to be really fascinating. There's going to be a panel called Star Trek into HD with Roger Lay and Rod Roddenberry talking about the Roddenberry Vault Restoration Project. And then on Sunday at 10:30 a.m., so you got to get up early if you're at a con. That might be a little early after drinking on Saturday night. Of course, no one's going to be out drinking, right, Zachary?
Oh, only if they have Romulan ale, right?
Right. But on Sunday morning, there is a discussion called The Treks That Never Were. This is hosted by Mark Altman, and it's going to talk about everything from the God thing, which is one of the original concepts that led into what became the motion picture, as well as Phase 2, the original Phase 2 from the 70s that did not get made, all the way through to 2006's Star Trek The Beginning Project. And that sounds really interesting. And now here's one for you, Zachary. I know that this is why you would absolutely want to go. At noon on Sunday, there is a panel with Anna Marquette and Charlie Beckerman called Star Trek TNG Fashion. And Anna and Charlie are from the Trek costuming blog Fashion It So. They're also the people hosting the cosplay contest on Saturday night. So let's just say, Zachary, TNG Fashion, what are the costumes that you feel are an absolute must to be discussed on this panel?
Boy, there's so much, this is like going back into my childhood. I just see these like snapshots of images in my mind. I see, the Romulan outfits, and I see, this is going to sound terrible, but I see like the Counselor Troy and Dr. Crusher doing their aerobics.
Oh, their aerobics.
That's got to be in there. I think they're just these well-known outfits.
So it's sort of a what were you thinking kind of thing, right? When you decided on those costumes for that scene. For me, I want to hear them talk about the Edo and the little pink and white ribbon suits that they wear as they run around Rubicon 3. And I also, of course, want to know about Angel One's costuming and the MC Hammer inspired outfits from Code of Honor.
Well, the thing that I actually comes to mind when I think of next generation fashion is kind of the loungewear look. All the men are wearing kind of these casual sweaters that are kind of patterned like Bill Cosby sweaters.
Yeah, it was the 80s, Zachary.
It was the 80s, right? Exactly. So it's hard to kind of capture. I grew up in it, so it just seems normal to me. Like, oh, that's what people wear in Star Trek. But if you didn't grow up in that era, I think they can look a little anachronistic now. And like, why were they going for that look? It was supposed to be sort of a casual progressive. Look how far society has come along. We can, wear casual sweaters and get, gallivant around the galaxy solving problems and be wonderful, idealized people. It was very optimistic and it was very progressive. And, the fashion was supposed to reinforce those ideas.
I do feel that the fashion from TNG does feel a little bit dated though. Like some of the fashion from some shows, it ages better. And some of the early TNG stuff, especially when the show was still in the 80s, it doesn't always carry over. Same with the hairstyles. There's no hairstyle panel on here, though, unfortunately.
Well, sadly, yeah.
All right. Well, the last two things on Sunday at 2:45, there is one called Behind the Official Star Trek Starships Collection. So you'll get a look at the ongoing model line that Eagle Moss is producing, which of course was a sponsor of the Ready Room during July. And I have a lot of those here. I love what they're doing, really fantastic models. And that would be really interesting to see sort of hands-on the process of how they put those things together. So that'll be a cool panel. And then lastly at 3:45, the final panel on Sunday, it's called Queer Trekkers, a discussion of gender and sexuality in the Star Trek universe, which is, of course, a big topic these days. And Star Trek has always been very progressive in its time of pushing the envelope forward. The earlier shows don't necessarily look progressive to us now, but again, if you put yourself in the time that they were made and you look at it from that perspective, you can see what they were trying to do. And now Star Trek Discovery, of course, will be pushing the envelope again. I say pushing the envelope. In a way, I think they will just be bringing Star Trek in line with other television that we have in 2016 and, of course, 2017 when it premieres. And we'll be getting something that will make Star Trek feel current with society as it is today. But hopefully, as Star Trek has done in the past, maybe they will push us forward a little bit more as well.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, Star Trek has always pushed the boundaries in terms of what's socially acceptable or what our current values are. It highlights the ideals and the best of what we have where we're at and what life could be in the future. And it by playing with different permutations, and each Star Trek series does this in a different way. It fights different battles and picks different things to focus on, and it moves the discussion forward. I like seeing Star Trek's take on what the possibilities for our own race could be down the road in the future. And I think this kind of challenging of society's norms is an important part of moving the whole discussion forward. So I think everyone's excited about that role that Star Trek plays. But looking at this list of panels, the one that really excites me is this Star Trek into HD, the Roddenberry Vault Restoration Project. Because I think that, for me, people may or may not know this about me, but one of my other interests is like genealogy and Ancestry.com, that kind of thing. To me, it's like finding old family photographs. They're just these precious artifacts. And I think for us, we're still living in a time when some of the actors from the original series are alive. Everyone from the Next Generation is still alive, but put yourself 30 or 40 or 50, 100 years from now, every little artifact that we uncover and we preserve will add to people's appreciation of this thing we love called Star Trek, which we hope in 100 years, they're going to be making new Star Trek and looking back and finding new meaning in all of this, all the materials from the 20th and now 21st century. So any little artifact that's uncovered, any piece of film, any clip, any photograph, all of that it just adds to the tapestry of this thing that we love. And I'm excited about that.
Yeah, and it relates to what you were saying earlier about the animated series, right? It's part of that restoration project, so we don't forget. And we always have this stuff with us. So I have to say, I think they've put together a really fantastic weekend for everyone at Mission New York. Wonderful panels, and it's too bad I can't go, but for those of you who are going, again, it's September 2nd to the 4th, and it looks like it's going to be fantastic. StarTrekMissions.com is the URL if you want to go to the official site and get your tickets. But yeah, very, very exciting. Well, that's all we have in news for today. Before we jump into the feature talking about crossover, here's a quick look at some of the other things we've been discussing here on the network.
Previously on Trek.fm, The Orb.
This episode takes place in the 6th season, so Kira is already very, very well established as a character. And part of what this story does, I think, is to challenge the foundation upon which Kira has built her life and her goals in life.
Meta Treks.
Wait, so we've got something borrowed, and we've got something blue. Spock is wearing blue. Henoch is wearing blue.
Henoch is wearing
this blue. This sounds like the making of a disembodied marriage to me. I don't know what you're thinking.
Saturday Morning Trek.
What I had to assure the fans was this is not going to be a kiddie show. This is not going to be a baby show. We are doing Star Trek. And we were able to do Star Trek in some ways a better way, because we could have wonderful spaceships, we could have wonderful aliens, wonderful planets, and we still had good stories.
And that's what else is happening on Trek.fm.
So check out all of these shows and find out what we're talking about in your favorite corner of the Star Trek universe. You can find us pretty much anywhere that you can get podcasts or audio. The best place, in my opinion, is on iTunes, because we are a featured content provider with Apple. So we have an artist section there in the iTunes store where everything that we do is very easily accessible. You can get there by going to itunes.com/trekfm. That's itunes.com/trekfm. And subscribe to the shows. Subscribing really helps us out. And also, if you have a moment and you'd like to leave a star rating or a written review, we would really appreciate that as well. If you're an Android user, you can now get us on Google Play Music. Just look in your Google Play Music app, search for Trek.fm or the name of one of our shows, and they should come up. Most of the shows are in there. And you can get us in other places as well, third-party apps, other platforms like Stitcher or TuneIn or SoundCloud. And of course, you can go to the website and stream from the show page or download the MP3 file. And we hope you enjoy all the shows and take in the full wide range of discussion that we have here about Star Trek. All right, Zachary, let's go ahead and bring in Rumman and Chowdhury and talk about Deep Space Nine. Sometimes actions can have unexpected consequences. Such was the case in the original series when Kirk convinced Mirror Spock to turn the Terran Empire from evil to good. Only he didn't know it. Kirk had the best intentions, but maybe there was a reason the Terrans were the way they were. We learned the result of Kirk's speech in the Deep Space Nine episode Crossover, the first of many trips to the Mirror Universe for the DS9 crew. And today we're going to talk about this episode, and to help us do that, we're joined by first-time guest here on the Ready Room, Rumman Chowdhury. Rumman, thanks so much for joining us finally. It's great to have you on the Ready Room for the first time. We've been talking about you joining us for quite a while. And finally, you're here. It only took the Mirror Universe to make it happen, apparently.
Magical things happen in the Mirror Universe.
They really do. Also joining us from Melodic Treks, it's Brandon-Shea Mutala, or B-Shea. Brandon, welcome back.
Hi, how's it going?
Great. It's very good to have you on here as well.
I'm happy to be here.
So before we jump into the discussion, here's a quick synopsis, as we always do here on the Ready Room, for those who haven't seen this episode or haven't seen it in a while. If you haven't seen it, you probably want to go watch it before you listen on, but here's basically what happens. While returning from a visit to the new Bajor colony in the Gamma Quadrant, Kira and Bashir have an accident in the wormhole and find themselves thrown into the Mirror Universe, where humans are slaves to a Klingon Cardassian Bajoran Empire. Taken aboard Terok Nur, Kira encounters an evil, well, a sort of evil version of herself, who is in charge of the station. Known as the Intendant, this version of Kira brings up Captain James T. Kirk, of whom Kira Nerys from our timeline knows nothing, or our universe knows nothing, and she also mentions the events of the classic episode Mirror, Mirror. Faced with the challenge of finding their way back home, Kira and Bashir must employ the help of familiar faces whilst steering clear of others. Along the way, they kill Odo, almost get O'Brien or Smiley killed, and get to watch Kira take a bubble bath. With the help of Avery Brooks's piano player personality, they escape just before they are to be executed and make it back to DS9 in their own universe, thanks to a little reverse wormhole accident magic. All right, so that's the basic rundown of Crossover. Now let's jump into the discussion here with initial thoughts. Rumman, what are your first thoughts here about Crossover?
I don't know if you'd want to start with me, because I'm not the biggest fan of this episode, and I'm sure we'll start to discuss that. The Mirror Universe is an amazing idea. I think it's really cool, and I just feel like they didn't do enough with it. And simultaneously, the characters they introduced, Intendant among them, are a little overacted and overblown. It felt almost comical instead of scary, and what they were going for was darker and scarier, and it just kind of seemed funny.
Do you think that's the nature of Star Trek, though, that this is season 2 of DS9, so especially coming out of the Next Generation, doing dark and scary is just not something that Star Trek typically did.
True. Yeah, DS9 does evolve into that, and there are some later episodes that are, really thought-provoking, and maybe because we're still early on Trek for DS9, it just hadn't quite gotten there yet. I think some of it was character rapport and interaction, which takes sometimes years to build among the actors. I will say, though, that I particularly loved the beginning shuttle scene with Julian and Kira. Just, I love early season Julian. I just love to hate him. He's just, and also I love to see his character evolve over time and grow up and learn a lot. But just early season Bashir is just like the guy you love to hate.
Julian, call me Julian Bashir.
That's true.
Yeah.
Can I call you Nerys? She's like, why not?
I like what he says, Julian, and then she doesn't want to say it, and he's like, come on, try it. It's like
I think he should stick to Dax.
That's true. Okay, well, B-Shea, how about you? What are your initial thoughts?
I love this episode. So for me, I never thought that the Mirror Universe was intended to be scary. It's just something fun to do to put our characters in, a different situation and watch them do strange things. And I loved Mirror Mirror. It's one of my favorite episodes of the original series, and Crossover is my favorite Deep Space Nine Mirror episode. And I really like what they did and how they set it up in this episode a lot, with doing it from Kira's point of view. And also because, this is, 20-some years, 25 years after the original series. A lot of people that may be watching Star Trek may not know about the original series and may not know the episodes as well. So to have it from the point of view of another character, not knowing that we've been here before, explaining it to Kira is a great way to do it. And then when she goes up to Dr. Bashir later on and says, "Have you heard of James T. Kirk?" And he's like, "Of course." Right? So I think it's really well done. I think it's neat how it really changed the whole game up, in that what Kirk did ended up being a bad thing for this universe, for Terrans and for humans. So it's fascinating that, because Kirk is a hero, right, on our side, and over here he's a villain now, basically, right, for what he's done. And humans will not hold this guy in high regard like we do. So it's kind of an interesting take on that. So I'm also really happy with where it went, with the fascination with the Klingons and the Cardassians, and just how wonderfully that the Mirror Universe expanded and got played upon later on with Worf coming in and the Klingon War, and it worked out so wonderfully and so perfectly for later on as well.
All right, fine, I'm sold. I'll vote for you for president.
That was easy. Good job, Isha. You have Rumman on board already.
So I hadn't thought about that, the seeing it from Kira's perspective, i.e. an outsider coasting, but when I watched it the first time and I was like, I don't know, like 14 or 15, and yeah, I wouldn't have seen Mirror Mirror. I would have had no way to watch it because it was, the 90s.
Yeah.
Didn't have interwebs and video on interwebs. So yeah, I think that's a perspective I hadn't thought about.
Yes.
I'm still not sold, though.
It is a great point that Kira is the one who is being told about it at first, and she's just completely clueless, like, I have no idea. Although, Bishay, you said that Kirk is a villain over there. He might be a villain amongst the Terrans, but a hero amongst the Klingons and the Cardassians.
Yes.
All right. So, Zachary, can you assist Bishay in further selling Rumman on Crossover, or are you not sold on it yourself?
I think I'm largely in Rumman's camp. I've never been a huge fan of this episode, much less Deep Space Nine's take on the Mirror Universe in general. Historically for me, Deep Space Nine has been a little dark. I like the more optimistic take on Star Trek that you get in The Next Generation or Voyager. I've come to appreciate Deep Space Nine as I've gone through more troubles in life. I've come to appreciate the struggles of the characters in Deep Space Nine. But insofar as Deep Space Nine is just a little dark for me already, this is like the darkest of the dark that you get. On the other hand, I like seeing the exploration of the dark sides of human nature. I think Star Trek can take a bit of an idealist perspective on human nature, and it's just fun to reverse that and see mankind's less admirable traits all wrapped together in a single story. So I've come to appreciate it. In terms of this episode, I like the callback to the original series, of course. Anything that adds to the continuity and anything we can learn about the characters from the original series and in any future Star Trek is inherently interesting to me. In terms of the Mirror Universe, the continuity bothers me a bit. I think I don't really quite understand how from decade to decade to decade you get sort of this parallelism of characters, and yet the events seem to radically diverge at some point. So kind of conceptually, it doesn't really add up in my mind. But I think I'm largely in Rumman's camp. The overacting in this episode, while it's charming and fun, and you can really see some of the range of the actors, it doesn't really add up and seems really forced to me. So this episode has never worked for me.
See, one of the things about this is like the way that they've diverged. I mean, yes, you could never have this. Like if let's say that the Divergent happened like right before the episode Mirror Mirror, right? Let's just say that's where it's split. We know it's before that, but let's just pretend. And everything up to that point is the same. With the amount of people that die and they advance their careers by killing people, and then with the complete fact that humanity was completely enslaved by the Klingons and the Cardassians and the Bajorans as well, you wouldn't have all of the same people there because marriages wouldn't happen, things like that. And I understand that that's a level of, what's the term I'm looking for? Disbelief that I'm willing to throw out the window to enjoy the episode.
But this is the 1990s. Didn't anyone see Jurassic Park? I know about the butterfly effect. This doesn't make sense, right?
Which I'm okay with that because it's just so fun to watch. I mean, the overacting is what what makes it a joy to watch, to see these people in these bizarre situations and stuff. We were saying at the beginning of the episode on the other side of the room.
The other side of the room.
About how you guys were like, you didn't like Avery Brooks' portrayal, and me, I love it. He is so over the top. It's wonderful. Like I said this on a recent episode of From There to Here, because I did the next one. I think it's, what's the next one? Shattered Mirror? Or no, Through the Looking Glass. And like this guy is just bat poop crazy. Like he is insane, and I love watching that laugh that he has when the way that he giggles, and I love watching Avery Brooks in this episode.
I get the sense that some of Avery really did make it into that character.
I guess
I think so.
He is a little bit like Avery playing piano in The Captains, right? Got a little bit of that going on here.
Actually, with him, I didn't think he was overacting. I just didn't believe him. I don't know. The acting just wasn't convincing for me. Kira, however, they call it like chewing the scenery. I mean, she was just like eating it, just shoving it in her face, right? She was over the top. But with Avery Brooks, I just didn't buy it. There was just, I don't know. Maybe he just already convinced me too much on his sincerity as, Benjamin Sisko, that I just couldn't buy him as this sort of, I guess I just couldn't sum up who he was. Like, what is he? He's a drifter. He's a con man. Not really, kind of an opportunist.
It isn't quite clear what he is, right, in the story.
I think I understood the motivation of everyone in the episode except for Sisko.
Well, he does stuff for the Intendant and gets paid for it and gets favors for it because he amuses her.
Yeah,
she just
I guess
got a soft spot for him.
Yeah, I don't know. But of the characters, I will say that I love what they did with Quark. I thought it was very interesting. Just to take his character in our universe and completely 180 him and, still keep him Quark. He's still, opportunistic, but at the same time realize that there's something horribly, horribly wrong and actually be trying to help people.
The thing about Quark is, on the surface, you could say that he is sort of 180 here. And in many ways he is. But and for season 2, I would say yes, definitely. As the series goes on, you see him become more and more willing to help people.
Yep.
And so I like to think that in Quark, that is inside him all the time. It's pulled out of him by becoming part of the family aboard the station over all those years. And it's interesting to see that even in the Mirror universe, where he has different pressures being applied on him by those who are running the station, that still somewhere deep inside, even though he wants to make a profit and he is devious, he still is trying to help the Terrans escape.
Yeah, he's like the Ferengi Harriet Tubman.
Yeah, I guess he is. Well, let's talk about the characters a bit more as we go along. Before we get too far away from the TOS connection here, I do want to talk a little bit more about the fact that they revisited and what we think about the DS9 take on the universe. Robert Hewitt Wolf, one of the writers on the series, talked about the approach that they were going for here and the fact that if you have an empire, and he modeled it after the Roman Empire, but if you have an empire that is very brutal, there might be a good reason why they are that way. Now, we might wish that they weren't that way because, of course, we don't want to be brutal to others. But if there are pressures from the outside that require you to have that approach in order to maintain your own survival, maybe there is a reason for that. And if you remove that quality, what happens to you? How does it change your relationship with the forces on the outside? And when Kirk convinced Spock in Mirror Mirror to look at things differently and try to create a kinder empire, he basically began tearing down that wall that protected the Terrans from everything else around them. So what are your thoughts on this premise of the Mirror universe a century after Mirror Mirror?
Yeah, I think this episode is actually really interesting to me for a couple of reasons in this regard. One is I think it speaks to an inherent tension in the world we see in Star Trek. Star Trek has a very idealistic take on human nature and what the future will be like. So much so that Kirk has essentially convinced Spock, Mirror Universe Spock, evil Spock, to take this empire and turn it into more of a pacifist political structure. And you can kind of see the downside of that now. If you weaken yourself politically in that way, you run the risk of being open to invaders, and eventually the empire gets conquered. So I can see you can interpret this episode, I think, as Star Trek kind of playing with the optimism of the Gene Roddenberry's vision of the future as very idealistic. On the other hand, I think you mentioned something about the consequences. Kirk set something in motion that led to some disastrous consequences for humans who came to be called Terrans, right? And I think for me, philosophically, one of the main theories of ethics is consequentialism, in which, an action is sort of right or wrong based on the consequences that happen. And that's one of the intrinsic problems with that view, is that you often just can't predict the consequences. If you take any action you want, you don't know what's going to happen a year from now or 100 years from now. All you can do is do what you think is right in the moment and hope for the best that good consequences ensue. And this is a great example of that. Kirk did, set something in motion that he thought was the right thing to do for good idealistic, Star Trek-y reasons, and it led to something disastrous. And any action we take is like that. Let's take like the American Revolution. That could have been disastrous as well. It wasn't, of course, but it could have been. And there's no way to foresee what the consequences of an action will be, especially in the long run.
I think the other problem with consequentialism is that you can't weigh against all the possible consequences that could have happened. So let's say, Kirk never came over, never convinced Spock, and then, humans eradicated all of the other species in the universe. We have no idea. Exactly.
And so you're sort of forced into kind of reevaluating the action. And every time the consequences swing a different direction, you have to go back and go, wait a minute, was that a good action or a bad action? Did Kirk do the right thing or the wrong thing? It's kind of a messy ethical theory when you look at it from that perspective.
Yeah.
I also find it interesting how with the Mirror Universe in Star Trek, we have this stable universe, the Mirror Universe, and then the Prime Universe. And we go between the two, whereas in reality, when we talk about these decisions and consequences, something like The Next Generation parallels, where we see Riker in all these different universes momentarily, is more of a reality. And then, like you were saying, Rumman, there could have been a universe where the Terrans eradicated all other life in the universe because they were allowed to continue to be barbaric and without anyone to push back against them. And so it would be interesting to see degrees, perhaps, of Kirk's influence on Spock. And then you could explore how those decisions affected not only the Terrans, but the greater universe along the way.
See, the interesting thing about this parallel universe, and you saying like this parallel universe has some type of anchor to ours, right? So at some point, like, so going backwards, we had, In a Mirror Darkly, retroactively, what does a retcon? But there's something about this mirror universe that ties it to our own. But the interesting thing about this is they call it the mirror universe, but it's not really like everything's an opposite of us. Yes, the humans are different, right? But yes, we see our characters different, but the Cardassians aren't that much different from what we see in our universe. The Klingons aren't really that much different from what we see in the universe. In later episodes, yes, Worf is different than we know him, but that's because of the different circumstances of it. But the Cardassians are just as brutal, running this ore mining station, so it's humans and then Bajorans because of their situations that are the different ones in this, which I think is really fascinating. That not everything is a complete opposite.
And it's weird. I guess this is something I just never understood about the mirror universe in general. What's so special about this universe where it seems bound to ours in some unique way? If we see
lightning, Zachary, lightning.
I mean, if we see countless parallel universes, why is this the mirror universe, the one parallel universe that seems to stick out in some special way?
The most important thing missing from this episode of the Mirror Universe were the goatees and mustaches to identify the evil people.
Exactly, because otherwise you would not know who is evil.
How would you know? I think everybody, babies, women, just everybody should just, that's on the bad side, should just have goatees and
mustaches. Goatees just went out of style in that
I guess
decade in the Mirror Universe.
Later, no more goatees.
So would you have preferred it if Intendant Kira had a goatee?
always.
I can see her with the goatee and the
The
sequined
sparkly,
headband.
I think goatees are replaced with sparkly headbands.
Yeah, sparkly headbands is how you know people are evil.
Yes.
And also, Odo has a belt. And up to this point, he did not have a belt in the regular universe. He has a belt later because Renee liked the belt and wanted it to be part of his uniform all the time.
It's a good thing Avery Brooks didn't have the beard, the goatee, because then in season 4 we would have been like,
confused.
is he invading from the other universe? And
We would have just all gotten confused. Who's the bad guy? What's happening now? He's a double agent. One thing I wish they would do with that was Odo's character. I just feel like every time we see Odo in a different set, he's always the same guy. You know, he's always that guy. He's always, all about efficiency. And, you had the great episode where they, not a Mirror Universe episode, but when they showed when DS9 was Tarek Noor and how he still was Odo, but he would carry out, what the Cardassians wanted because he's loyal and it's very, Eichmann trials and, banality of evil and all that great philosophical stuff. But yeah, I would have liked to see Odo be somebody else than Odo.
I'm picturing Odo like slacking off, showing up late for work.
That's what I'm saying. Like he shows up kind of drunk one day and he's like, it's fine,
I can see him. It's like one morning he's supposed to be on duty at 0600. It's like 0800 and then you see his bucket just kind of fall over and he like runs out. He's like smashed from the night before.
He can't reform himself into humanoid properly.
Yeah, he just kind of
exactly
rolls on it. Yeah, right.
I don't know. I think he is very different in this episode because what you're saying when, he's justified and he's justice oriented and that's how we see him all the time, especially when we see him in past episodes, but he's fair and he doesn't let people push him around and he tries to be fair to everybody. And in this, he's brutal. He's slapping the slaves around and stuff like this. And even when he was working for the Cardassians on Tarek Noor, he wasn't like that. He treated the Bajoran prisoners with respect, and he for the most part tried to get to the bottom of all the situations. Yes, in things past, we learned that he didn't fully investigate his first investigation, but he tried to treat everybody with respect and saying, I'm not taking sides here at all. And in the crossover universe, he clearly is taking sides by being brutal to the Terrans.
I think, though, in the Mirror Universe, it's a little fuzzier than it is with Cardassians taking over Bajor, right? Because that is, they are ruling this planet illegally. They're, conquering a people. Whereas we would have already had generations of the Terrans being considered this, brutal race that needs to be, kept under wraps. And, he would have, it wouldn't have been this, I guess, exogenous shock. It would have just been something intrinsically in their society and culture that predates him. So I think that would be the only difference. But watching Odo slap Julian was kind of funny, though.
I don't know, but Odo gets his comeuppance because he gets an epic, death that splatters into.
He goes all Stay Puft Marshmallow Man and just like, which is I think.
Did you forget rule number 14? Yes.
I was like, is this some sort of Odo rules of acquisition? Like, should we be writing these down?
I was thinking of Leffler's laws.
Yeah.
These are like Odo's laws.
Odo's laws.
See, the awesome thing with this as well is the death of Odo in this episode plays major ramifications in the literary universe later on, which is really cool.
I think Odo in this episode is interesting for me, and going back to a few things that you guys have said, one thing that we don't know in the Mirror Universe is how was Odo discovered and who was his role model moving forward after he was discovered as he was learning to live with humanoids, because in the normal timeline, it was Dr. Mora. And so he had this influence of Bajorans around him. And so when he was the security chief on Tarek Noor, maybe he had this feeling that he wanted to protect the Bajorans in a way, like not be too harsh with the Bajorans because he had this connection to them. Whereas here, he's sort of unleashed. And there's a brutality to this empire in the Mirror Universe that you don't necessarily have under the Cardassian occupation, because the Cardassians, again, they were using the Bajorans as slave labor. They want to keep them alive because they need them to do this job. Whereas in this mirror universe, it feels like, yeah, they need them to do this job, but they're also just as happy to kill them on a whim because they're so brutal. And that's one difference for me in seeing how Odo behaves. But I feel that Odo in this episode, in this mirror universe versus the normal Odo that we see, they kind of are the same character. I feel like Odo, he adapts himself to the environment that he's in, but there's this common thread that runs through him every time you see him, whether it's episodes like Things Past, where he's on Terra Nor, or this mirror universe, or working with the Federation on Deep Space Nine. And it's as if putting him in this situation, it just brings out his need for order all the time. He's by the book, he's the justice first. And his need for order and that very black and white view of justice, which is what we see when he was on Terra Nor, that seems to be who he is. And it's because of the influence of people like Sisko and the other Starfleet officers that's sort of tempered a bit. And he gradually learns, and then his relationship with Kira over time, I think, softens him up a lot as well. And since you don't see that here, I feel like this is Odo. It's just the circumstances that make it different.
One thing I thought was interesting while we're talking about Odo, it seemed like Intendant Kira had an interesting attachment to Odo. I mean, she calls him out as being unique, one of a kind, and she's kind of speaks really highly of him. Given how negative she's about everything else.
Mm-hmm.
Although I feel like there was a bit of she definitely thought of people as her pets. She treated Sisko that way. She treats Odo that way. She's proud of him being unique because he's like her prize caged animal that nobody else has, right? That really expensive breed of schnitzel poo or whatever the dog is. That's cool now.
Except Odo can, he can turn into his own litter box or something.
Exactly.
Easy to take care of.
I would have never thought of that, but that's true. Cleans up after himself.
Right.
Yes.
Hypoallergenic.
But this, insofar as they don't know about the wormhole in the mirror universe, Odo is really unique. They don't know where he came from. He's one of a kind. They have no idea of the founders yet, of course. And
so they don't know about the wormhole. In crossover, in this episode, it's kind of not clear that they don't know about the wormhole because they escape back by going through the wormhole again, and there's a Klingon ship pursuing them. So I guess at that point, they realize, there's a wormhole here.
But they don't really go back to it. They don't talk about it later on when they go back to the mirror universe. I think that this mirror universe doesn't know about it, right? Because of who Sisko is and Sisko dying. And again, this goes back to the literary universe with Sisko being the emissary, and that's why it was never found in this universe, was because the emissary ends up dying, right? We find out in the next episode that Sisko's character died in the mirror universe.
Yeah, they make such a big point of saying that the station is not by the wormhole. It's where it's supposed to be. It's over in orbit of Bajor.
That's
right?
true. It's in orbit of Bajor. Yeah. Wouldn't you love to see all of the scenes from Deep Space Nine in which Sisko and the prophets have their conversations, but with this Benjamin Sisko? And how would the prophets manage to talk to this guy?
I'm thinking like what are mirror universe prophets like? Are they like the pirates?
I was about to say they would probably be like the pirates, right? They would just sort of be diabolical, or they could be trickster gods. They could all be like little Lokis.
Why didn't they do that?
That would have been fun. I think that would have been, and then Mirror Universe Sisko would have gotten along really well with them.
I think it would be awesome if they were clockmakers. And instead of going to this white area, you went into a room like in Back to the Future with all the clocks on the walls. And that's where they have their conversations. And they're so concerned about, why didn't you do this on time?
You're messing up the linear time.
That's right. Okay, well, let's talk about Kira a little bit. And there are a couple of levels here to talk about Kira. Where I want to start is just with the tone of the show, because I think today, if this show came on, we wouldn't think anything unusual about it whatsoever. But I do remember when it first aired, the sexuality of the Intendant felt very unusual for Star Trek at that point. And it's hard for me to keep straight in my head elements of the story in DS9 in the Mirror Universe, because often when I think about the sexuality, I think about things that come later on down the road, particularly the Intendant's fondness for Ezri. But what we see here does set that up a little bit. It lays the foundation for that. How do you feel about this sort of element being introduced into Star Trek, and also how it was perceived then versus how it's perceived now, and how societal standards and just the way that we view the world changes over time?
Yeah, so I actually have quite a lot of thoughts on it. So first, I think a lot of the reviews will say something like, Kira's a lesbian or Kira's bi. And, I think it's like almost like a childish view of, different non-heterosexualities where, because you're not straight, that must mean you're hypersexual, right? Sort of feeds into this, these mythologies of gay men being hypersexual or gay women being hypersexual. And honestly, what I didn't really end up seeing it as sexuality as, her desire, but more as sexuality as power. Like I said, she likes owning people and she likes owning them in every way possible. She just finds it fun. She's bored. She has everything. What can she do? She wants to manipulate people in every way she can. I don't even think she particularly cares, as long as she gets something out of it, or she gets, she's somewhat amused. So it's really just sexuality as ownership, in which case I admire the thought of the character. So you can imagine, I guess going back to the mirror universe analogy of Terrans being like the Romans, what's one way to own your people or own a group of people? It's to dominate them sexually, right? Have the women be enslaved, have the men be castrated, right? So it's sort of a gender flip of that, where she just wants to physically own everybody.
I thought it was a really interesting contrast with the Kira we normally see. The Kira we normally see, I think, is fairly stiff as a character, right? And here, the intended Kira,
very guarded.
She kind of swaggers into the room. She moves. She's fluid, and I think it was just part of a kind of a necessary contrast to the Kira we see. But I got to push back a little bit, because this in the 1990s we've had we already had the Next Generation. We had some sexy things in the Next Generation, right? We had Loxana Troy, we had
Loxana and Alexander took a mud bath together.
Exactly. And going all the way back to the original series, that was a sexy show in a lot of ways. Kirk had his women, and I think maybe we're looking at this through a little bit of rose-colored glasses. I mean, this is way tamer than anything you'd see on like Dallas 15 years before this episode aired, right? So it's unusual for Star Trek, maybe, but it's not that over the top. And I think Star Trek has dabbled in this area over the decades.
Let's not forget Angel One Riker with his lovely little torso-bearing uniform.
Well, or the episode that we did last week on the Ready Room, Justice, where I had not watched that episode in quite a long time, and then they take Riker and the crew to go meet the other Ito, and they're running and they get over there, and then she gives Riker a hug and she says, "Oh, I thought you would be out of breath," and he says, "I may surprise you in many other ways." I'm like, wow, that was really a line in this episode. I forgot about that.
Oh, Riker.
Just remember, Chris, any hat.
Any hat, yes.
Well, I was rewatching the game because everybody was talking about it because of Pokemon Go. And, it starts off with Riker and Ryza, right? Just clearly just there to be sleeping with some alien chick, right? That he doesn't even really know. I agree. I don't think it was. I think it was different for Deep Space Nine up to the point, and for Kira, but I absolutely agree that it wasn't different for Star Trek as a show.
See, when I watched this for the first time, so I watched this during its original run, so I was 13 years old, and I've said this on the Babel conference and stuff, and I've said this in other episodes. Like, I've led a pretty sheltered life, and I don't understand, and I'm not knowledgeable on homosexuality and those kinds of issues and stuff. So a lot of those things, even when they're like right in my face, like go right over my head, because I just, even at 34 years old that I am right now, I still miss a lot of these things,
Wait.
And
so you first saw this when you were 13?
Yeah.
That explains your sequin headband collection. Okay.
So all those issues that come up later on with Kira being like, is she bi or whatever? Like, I never thought about those things, right? Like, even when they're like right in your face, I never really addressed them. They just kind of went over my head. So I don't know, like that's all that I can say about it. I mean, like, yeah, I mean, I was 13 years old and I love the bath scene. Yeah. Right. But, but for like other reasons. Right. So, I don't know. So I don't have much to add on that because even still at 34 years old, like I'm trying to understand. I ask people about it, I talk about it, but I still don't understand it all. So.
I mean, and the bath scene is actually a really good example of her using sex as power, right? So she's in this bath and she's making Cisco sit there and just like, basically teasing him. And then at one point says, ooh, 2 of Cisco, like that would be great. Right. He takes offense at it and she's like, oh, I'm sorry. Did that hurt your little feelings? She's clearly playing with him.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, I think that's an excellent way to look at it. It is sexuality as power in this episode rather than, sexual orientation or anything, which, as you say, has been talked about with this character, not just this episode, but this character, the Intendant, over time.
That's an interesting contrast because
later on when you get to Ezri.
That's an interesting contrast because some of the sexual characters we've seen, like Loxana Troi, hypersexual, are comical characters. That sexuality is not used for power; it's something to be laughed at. And here we're seeing it serving a very different purpose, I think.
Oh, I like Loxana. I like her. I like her more the older I get. I agree. When I was younger, I saw her as more comical. But the older I get, the more I understand how so much of her sexuality is her being okay with herself and saying, why shouldn't we talk about these things? Why is this a shameful thing for me to talk about? And there's just some really great episodes that, again, I did not appreciate when I was younger, but, 20 years later, appreciate so much more.
I think that they should do another Star Trek series here right now, totally. That's like a Golden Girls ripoff with Loxana.
I would watch the hell out of that.
Pulaski.
We got to have Riker in there as a roommate, right? Riker's got to be
Pulaski's on there.
Pulaski's there.
Pulaski.
To add that awkward "I slept with your dad" thing.
Riker's dad is the crazy neighbor next door, right? Shows up once in a while, middle of the night.
That would be awesome.
He's the ex-husband.
Yeah. But I agree with you, Rumman, on the Loxana. In The Next Generation, she is often used for comical reasons, and when you're younger and you watch it, you take it that way. As you get older, you see other things, and her appearances on DS9 have been wonderful. They did so much for her character on DS9, and really when she opens up to Odo, and you understand a lot more about why she carries herself the way that she does, and how she's using that to, in some ways, protect herself, but in other ways, like you say, being comfortable with herself as well.
This episode kind of gives new meaning to the old joke, there once was a man with a bucket.
This episode. I think I know that joke. Do I want to?
I don't know that joke either.
Something to Google after the show.
Something to Google. Okay. All right. I'm not sure if I want to Google that.
Was he from Nantucket?
It rhymes. Right?
Well, let's talk about a few more characters. One thing that stood out to me about this episode is, as is a running joke on the Orb, Cirroc Lofton does not appear in this episode. And this episode was not directed by Cliff Bull, because that's usually the case where you see that Cirroc Lofton was not in this episode. But the reason he's not in this episode, as we will learn later on in the Mirror Universe, is that Jake Sisko was never born. Therefore, he cannot be in here. But most of the characters were, and some of them are portrayed very differently, and some of them are portrayed pretty much the same. We've talked about Quark, we've talked about Odo, we've talked about Sisko a fair bit, but we also see Garak in this episode, and we also see O'Brien or Smiley. What do we think, like Garak, for example? How do you read Garak in this episode in terms of him being the same character or being different, mirror or not mirror?
See, I think this is fascinating too, because to see Garak in this position, again, this is only the 4th episode that we've seen with Garak, right? So he's barely been in the series at this time. We saw him in past prologue, Cardassians and The Wire, right? That's all that we've seen him so far. So he, at this time, in the timeline of watching DS9, we still know nothing about him. So when I watch this, I like to think that this is who Garak is as well. Like, this is a part of who he is. Like, he is this militaristic tyrant and whatnot. And I think that's how he would have been in the Obsidian Order, because I believe he was in the Obsidian Order, right? I mean, we've been given enough evidence that he was. But
I'm pretty sure he was, yeah.
Yeah, we're all pretty sure that he was, right? But
I think of this episode as Garak Unchained, right? This is Garak, not having to play the role of being, Garak the tailor.
But he does make a comment about he really loves a nicely tailored uniform.
It's a tailored dress, right?
Yeah, dress.
Oh, that's right. When Kara walks over with a blue gown on. Yeah, that's right.
I like a well-tailored dress.
But it's fascinating that it's just so well written that he's here and he's on this station again, but in this time he's in a situation of power. I mean, what they did with the Mirror Universe on Deep Space Nine, and even later on with the characters that came in, is just so wonderful, and it just works so well. I just love it.
And he's still scheming Garak, right? He's still got his little plot. Well, what's funny, it's that it's almost comical in that universe, because it's like, oh, what, it's Saturday? Yeah, it's time for Garak to try to kill me,
Exactly.
And the way he says that in that scene, too, when he's manipulating our Kira, and he's like, and that you'll take over the thing and whatnot, and then you could go explore your pa or something, and he just spits that word out. Like, it's just, I love it.
But I think that Garak always sees himself in a position of power all the way through all of DS9. It's just because he always believes that he's a step ahead of everyone else, and he has information that they don't have, and that at the end of the day, he can always control the game. And so, again, he was very much the same character for me here.
Garak's a cockroach, and I mean that as a compliment.
Yeah, he's always... When I talked about Odo and his authoritarian nature and maybe tendency towards brutality, I talked about how being around Cisco and the other Federation officers and Kira and others kind of tempered that and made him softer. But I don't think that that's what really happens with Garak throughout DS9. I think that he just knows how to play the game and keep that under wraps most of the time, and he lets it out when the opportunity arises. You see that when he interrogates and tortures Odo. You see that towards the end when he goes to Cardassia to liberate his homeworld. He has that nature in him all the time. But here it's just completely, as you said, Zachary, unchained. And he really revels in it. And then, again, also, Rumman, I think you're right, that it does come off as almost comical. Because it's a caricature at this point, of who he would be. When you watch it, you pointed out, Bishay, that this is only the fourth time that we've seen him. And that's something that's really hard for us to remember when we go back and rewatch, because we know the characters so well. It's interesting how, in a sense, how little his character changed over time. I think his character did change a lot over time, but then you can watch it here and feel like you expected this all along, even though it's only the fourth time we've seen him.
I think it's hard to go back and look at any character from early in any series. We have 7 years of history with all of these characters in any series, and we take one of these early episodes. How much are we really reading into these characters versus just seeing the second season perception of those characters, based on our first viewings. And I'm in a unique position where I didn't actually watch this the first time around. I didn't sort of cue into Deep Space Nine until much later. I maybe watched one season of DS9 when it first aired. I got busy with college and grad school and then revisited it years later. So I don't actually remember watching this episode back then. So I don't remember having that innocent, naive second season perception of this episode.
College is no excuse for missing Star Trek episodes, Zachary.
Yeah. Gonna boot me off the network, yeah.
I remember watching the teaser for this, like, next time on Deep Space Nine, and like how dark and moody it was, and I was like, oh, I can't wait till next week. Oh my god, it's like,
my goodness, you have a good memory.
Oh, this is right at the peak of my Star Trek fandom, and like this, it was really when it started to have an impact on me, right? So, but going back to something that you said there, I mean, I wonder if, so you're saying this is Garak Unchained, right? I wonder if on our side of the universe, on our side of the Mirror Universe, that our Garak actually has a secret, fascination, and he wants to be a musician, and that's his first album, Garak Unchained.
Garak Unchained, it could be.
And he could sing Unchained Melody.
I feel like it would be the title of his autobiography. Garak
That's the title of the duet that he does with Vic over in
I can see
Vic's,
it's like stripped down, only piano and a spotlight, just unfettered. Garak Unchained.
His autobiography would be called Garak Unchained, and his biography would be called Garak Unhinged. Yes. And I can see if he were a musician, Bishay, that would be awesome, because he would be maybe sort of like Elton John in the 80s. He would have like great outfits, but he would make them himself as a tailor.
See, I was thinking Liberace. I'm going to go all the way out there.
Liberace.
Well, we have the sequin theme, right?
He would Liberace that.
Well-tailored sequined outfits.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But
maybe he makes Kira's headband.
With some...
Maybe he...
Oh, yeah.
You never know.
Maybe he does make them. Maybe he secretly does make them for her.
Yeah, it was one of those favors they do for each other in this episode.
Yeah, people think there's something going on in Kira's quarters when just she and Garak are in there alone, but actually they've got the glitter out on the table and they're making the headbands.
They're bedazzling things.
Yes. Oh man, I can see commercials for the Bedazzler in the Mirror Universe with Garak. He's the spokesperson for the Bedazzler.
And those things you can like staple on the jeans, like those little fake rubies and stuff you can put on your jeans.
Exactly. So another character to talk about. Let's talk about Kira a little bit. And Rumman, you brought up in our notes that this is a case of how do you outsmart yourself, because you have Kira trying to guide Kira in her actions here. And so what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, so it's really interesting to see Kira interact with Kira. I felt like our universe Kira was kind of jealous of alternate universe Kira, right? In a way. I mean, obviously did not admire the fact that she was evil or things like that, but, I think Kira wishes she had that much power in our world and could dominate and do whatever she wanted and, have people at her beck and call. And I think it also made it very interesting and difficult. I feel like they could have done more with it, to be honest. But, if you're battling yourself and you know how you think, how do you then, best yourself in battle?
Well, it's interesting because, we've got the Mirror Universe, and in this situation, it's the Bajorans on the alternate side that have the power and whatnot. And yes, Kira, I think, is very jealous of that. And she says to her, she's like, how do you know you're not going to influence me to have a stronger Bajor when I get back? And I can't remember exactly what Kira says, but when, like, Intendant, and she's like, oh, you know how to, like, I can't remember the word she uses right off the top of my head, but she's like, oh, you know how to plead to my ego or whatever she says, right?
Right.
But yeah, she's totally jealous of her, and it's interesting. And the fact that, to me, the first time I saw it, it was a shock that Kira went to Intendant Kira and was like, here, I want to get out of here, and I'll give you information that Garak's going to kill you. She's like, so what? He's always trying to do that. Yeah, but he wants me to replace you. And she's like, oh, well, that's a little more creative than normal, but whatever.
Right, whatever.
So, I don't know. I think it's neat. I think she did a really good job of playing against herself.
Well, I think Major Kira from the regular universe, as powerful of a character as she is, she's largely a character that's out of control. Her entire life has been influenced by events that are larger than her, and she's been sort of trying to regain that control over long. So yeah, it's very easy to look at someone like Intendant Kira and think, I really want some of that, either for my own life or for Bajor as a whole.
But you don't mean Major Kira is out of control. You mean that the course of her life has been outside of her control.
Exactly. That events
we see her regaining control of her life over the course of the series. Yeah. It's interesting, Bishay, that you brought up Bajor and her saying, maybe I'm going to go back and make a stronger Bajor, because one thing that it doesn't really get lost in the episode, I think it's explained, but when we think, because of the emblem in particular, it feels like it's sort of this equal alliance between Bajor and the Klingons and the Cardassians, but in actuality, it's the Klingons and the Cardassians, and then Bajor petitioned to be part of the Empire after they were freed from Terran occupation. And so Bajor actually is not equal in power with them. So you could see a situation where Major Kira convinces Intendant Kira to go back and do what Spock did from Mirror, although maybe in reverse, like not make it more peaceful, but maybe rise up and try to conquer the Cardassians and the Klingons. And then what effect would that have moving forward if we were to revisit the Mirror Universe again a century after this?
Well, our universe, Kira, does call her out on that, right? She's saying, well, I can't do this. She's like, oh, I thought you were in power. What, are you not? She calls her out on it. Because I think she realizes that, and because she sees it in herself, Intendant Kira's being very ego-driven. And I think a lot of that, as you guys pointed out, because so much of our Kira's life has been out of her hands and she's always had to survive in response to the people's actions. I think that a Kira in a universe where she had been fully autonomous and in power would have been more like Intendant Kira. But she knew, I guess going back to the original question of how do you battle yourself, she knew that saying something like that would set Intendant Kira off and it would annoy her because she wants to have the power. She has the illusion of power and she wants to point that out just to bother her.
Well, she knows she'll take the bait, right? You know,
yeah,
she
absolutely.
She knows that she says, hey, I thought you were the intendant, right? You can do anything.
Exactly.
You're in charge, aren't you?
I also, at the end of the episode, she finally threatens to kill Kira along with Bashir. But it seems that a lot of her actions throughout the episode, her willingness to listen to Major Kira is directly connected, of course, to the fact that it's her, essentially. She has this maybe fondness for herself. She's obviously, as you said, very ego-driven. And that factors in. I'm thinking of the scene in The Undiscovered Country where Kirk and the shapeshifter is also Kirk. And he says, oh, I can't believe I kissed you. It's like, oh, it must have been your life's ambition. You know, it's sort of that ego that you're in love with yourself a little bit.
It reminds me a lot of Picard versus Shinzon and Nemesis when Picard says, I know what he thinks he knows what I'm going to do. I've got him, you know?
Yeah. And gosh, I always think, not to get off on Nemesis here, but it would have been even more powerful if that could have been Patrick Stewart. Like somehow, like here, because you have non-a-visitor playing off non-a-visitor, or in The Undiscovered Country, it is William Shatner. I think the concept of Shinzon and Nemesis is a very interesting one, but they couldn't really pull it off because it's clearly two different actors, clearly two different people. But this idea would connect very well with that if it could have actually been Patrick Stewart somehow.
I think it's really hard to act against yourself. Brent Spiner's really good at this, and Non-a-Visitor is really good at it here. I think her acting really shines. I can't imagine that's easy to play off your own nuances that way.
Especially when it's not actually happening right in front of you.
Right.
Since you have to shoot the scenes in two different times. Yeah. Yeah, it is quite a talent. What about Smiley or O'Brien? Rumman, you also mentioned in relation to O'Brien how oppression affects people and how it feeds into their minds and impacts what they think they can accomplish and how they see themselves.
Right. So Deep Space Nine, I always loved the show because it had a very strong sense of morality. It pointed out flaws in society. You know, it was a lot darker, as we've pointed out, and I loved that about it. And one thing that they've never shied away from is showing like oppression of a people. They did it by going back into the 50s in our world. They've done it so many times. I think this was a precursor to a lot of it because we're still very early on. I think they were sort of feeling out the waters. But what they're doing here with O'Brien is really showing what slave mentality is, right? It's that after generations of oppression, you don't even think you can accomplish things. It's not as easy as saying, open the doors, hey, you're free now, you know, everybody go to college. You know, it's your mentality about who you are and what you can accomplish is totally different. There's this really great quote when O'Brien is finally convinced to help them out. Because remember, he literally was telling Julian, I don't see you, you're not here, I don't want to get in trouble. And then, you know, it occurs to him, and it took him so long to understand. And he has this quote where he says, you know, this man is a doctor where he comes from, and there's an O'Brien there just like me, except he's some kind of high-up chief of operations. And they're Terrans. Can you believe that? Maybe it's a fairy tale he made up, but it started me thinking how each of us might have turned out had history been just a little different. And really, it took him the entire episode for him to even fathom that he could be anything more than some schlub who gets smacked around in life. So I thought that was really compelling. His character just, you know, spoke a lot to just, you know, how people in poverty are, how people from underprivileged backgrounds or people subject to structural oppression, and how it's just not so easy just to break the chains and say, hey, you know, keep on keeping on.
Rumman, I think this is a really interesting point because this is what I love about the There's some subtle things in this episode, like the fact that the humans are called Terrans instead of humans. They've been dehumanized, right? Even the humans themselves don't think of themselves as human beings anymore. They think of themselves as Terran ore miners, right? They see themselves only in with limited possibilities in a limited sense. And I mean, all of us are like that to some degree, right? We all put ourselves in our little box and we see a certain sphere of possibilities for ourselves. And you can kind of think of the mirror universe as this grand metaphor for not seeing the possibilities for your own life. But the fact that the humans are called Terrans in this, I find that fascinating because it just speaks to this radical dehumanization of people in this slave position.
Mm-hmm. I mean, an example for me here, and of course I'm not comparing it to this in the, extremism of what's being done or anything, but just in terms of where you see yourself in a society and what you think that you can accomplish. So like for me, I've lived 20 years in Japan, and I'm American, I'm white, and, my Japanese is not the best. And Japanese society still has this sort of, they put foreigners in a box. So you're either Japanese or you're not. And it doesn't matter how long you've lived here. None of that matters. You're either Japanese or you're not. And if you're not, you're always treated as sort of a separate fringe part of society. And you're treated in a certain way. And you're kind of always treated that same way, whether you've been here for a week or for 50 years. And when it comes to work, for example, trying to find a job, as a foreigner, you're not going to go to a big Japanese company and get hired, generally. There are exceptions, but that stuff's typically off limits to you because you're not Japanese, you don't fit into the system. And so there is that sort of mentality that develops if you've been here over time. So like for me, again, I've been here for 20 years. And so my mentality really is that if I see this opportunity or this opportunity or this opportunity, my mentality is immediately that, well, that's inaccessible to me. I can never even pursue that because that's not who I am. And that path is closed to me. So on varying degrees of just bringing it back to Earth and the real world. And I think the bigger problem that faces a lot of groups around the world today in different countries is exactly that, right? Where society blocks you off based on who you are, which group you belong to, the color of your skin, or the language you speak, or anything like that, or your religion.
But here it's more insidious because O'Brien has internalized all of that, and he doesn't even see those as possibilities. Yeah. He doesn't even see those as challenges that can be overcome.
But I think that we all internalize it, like what I'm saying, that for me, I've kind of internalized that as well. And I think that in various groups in society today, it's very much internalized. And while they're not processing ore necessarily, and they're not necessarily going to be killed at the drop of a hat because of something that they said, although that can be the case in some societies, I think that the opportunities that they're perfectly capable of pursuing or qualified for are inaccessible to them, both because walls are being put up by others, but also because they have internalized that. And I think that's what Rumman is saying, that they've internalized it to the point where they feel like they can't pursue it anymore.
I think, right?
I
think India is a really good example. They have a caste system for forever and have technically abolished the caste system, but people have jobs that are still aligned with what their jobs would have been had the caste system still been around. It's still the untouchables who clean up the trash, and it's still the Brahmins who tend to be elected into positions of political power. It hasn't changed.
Mm-hmm. So changing the laws, changing the rules doesn't actually change society.
It does not.
It takes a long time. Yeah. Exactly.
And I think for me as a former educator, I think that's fundamentally, when it comes down to brass tacks, that's the real purpose of education, I think, is to get people to see the possibilities that they don't see for themselves and really empower people to, have control over their own lives. O'Brien is not in power in this, as much as he knows, as good as he is at fixing things around Terrak Nor, he doesn't see possibilities for himself. And you want to empower him to just have a richer vision for what life could be like, either his own life or society as a whole.
And of course, at the end, near the end, Kira reinforces the other side when O'Brien gives her that speech. And he says, whatever it's like over there, there has to be something better than here. And her response to him was, not for you, right? So you tell a certain group that, you don't deserve these, anything better. There's nothing better for you. And so you just reinforce that mentality.
And I love that when Bashir tells Odo that he's a doctor, Odo basically thinks it's a joke.
Yeah. Yep.
Like
that's when he forgot
that's
You
not
forget
something that
rule
happens.
number 4.
Smack.
Yeah.
That was rule 14, I think. Rule 14. Yeah.
14. Careful, Vishay. You're going to think you're following the rules and it's the wrong one, and then you're going to get slapped.
I wonder if he enjoyed backhanding Julian a couple of times, just like smack. He got to back him like 2-3 times.
I think he really did. It seems like he did, for sure.
I know, he seemed to relish that quite a bit. He's like, hold on, let's do another take.
Rene Auberjonois was like, really did it. He's like, I hate working with this guy. I hate working with Alexander or Siddig El-Fidel at that time. And he's like, just like gives him a hit.
Like I said, this was season 2 Julian. It's the Julian we love to hate.
All right. Well, we have passed an hour, so let's wrap up with our final thoughts and our ratings. So, Bishay, what are your final thoughts on Crossover?
I love this a lot. It's my favorite Mirror Universe episode from D Space Nine. It's a fun romp through the Mirror Universe. I understand that the Mirror Universe is completely implausible, but it doesn't affect my enjoyment of it at all. When my wife and I did the D Space Nine rewatch, and I told her that a Mirror Universe episode was up, she's like, "Do we have to watch this?" Because she hates watching the Mirror Universe episodes.
Really?
And I'm like, "How can you hate this? It's just so much fun. It's like a gigantic slice of cake, So I just love watching these ones so much. It's a great episode. It's a lot of fun, and I give this episode 5 crazy Cisco laughs.
Okay. All right. How about you, Zachary?
I watched this episode twice before we recorded the show tonight, and the first time around, I had a hard time making it through the episode. Like I said, this is an episode I've skipped in my rewatches countless times. I just don't go back to this episode. So much so, but the second time I went to rewatch it, I forced myself. I said, I'm going to rewatch every single scene in this episode. I'm not going to let my attention drift. I'm going to watch it. And I got to say, I really enjoyed it. When I forced myself to watch it, the campiness of the episode really worked for me better. Even though I have problems with the Mirror Universe as a whole conceptually, I like the fact that it's a metaphor for a lot of different things. It's a metaphor for seeing the possibilities in our own lives. It's a metaphor for the dark sides of human nature. So it really does kind of work for me better than it did a day or so ago. It's never going to be one of my favorite episodes. So given that, I think I'm going to give this 7.5 out of 10 bubble baths with Intendant Kira.
All right. And Rumman, how about you?
I think my rating of it has gone up because of Bishay's very earnest, defense of it all throughout this podcast. So I think it has moved from maybe about 2 sequin headbands to about 3.5 out of 5 sequin headbands. Still don't think I would watch it again, unless forced to, but, I've moved up a little bit.
Forced by Odo. Right.
Hey, moving up a whole sequin and a half there. Headband. That's a pretty big change. Yeah, that's almost doubling your rating.
That can also be translated as 4 out of 5 Odo backhands.
Okay, very good. All right. Well, yeah, for me, I enjoyed the episode just because the Mirror Universe is fun. I like this rendition of the Mirror Universe better than the original series rendition because, as we've discussed today, there actually is a bit more social commentary here and it gives you a little bit more to think about. But I also agree with what we said early on that, I don't know, some of it comes off as comical when maybe it wasn't intended to. Some of it's a bit over the top. But that's the nature of the Mirror Universe, so I guess that works okay for me. So I'm going to give this episode 14 rules of obedience.
Before we go, since we're talking about universes, though, I just have to say, what of Lazarus?
What's the matter, antimatter? Yes. All right. So thank you for joining us today. Rumman, before we go, tell everyone where they can find you if they want to chat with you more. Are you around in social media? Are you around on other podcasts? Or
I am.
Do they just need to get interested in the world of data science?
Yeah, I was going to say I am. However, most of my media is data science related. But if that is something that interests you, I am on Twitter at RUCHOWDH. and on my website at rummanchowdhury.com, on which I've started posting jobs. So if you're interested in cool and interesting and atypical data science jobs, they're on there as well, and my blog.
Excellent. Sounds good. And Bishay, how about you?
Well, I have my own Mirror Universe version where I talk about data science. And and you can find me on Twitter at Brandon-Shea Mutala. You can find me on my show that I host on the network here, Melodic Treks, which is all about the music of the Star Trek franchise. And if you take a listen to my special episode number 1 that I released, I actually got a 5-minute interview with Nichelle Nichols, and I got her to sing for me. So I'm pretty awesome. Stoked about that. So if you want to take a listen to that, that was a pretty big moment for me. I'm also on many episodes of our daily rewatch for From There to Here, and just before we sat down, I was watching Innocence from Voyager. So
very good. I love that you cracked up Rumman with the data science joke.
I had to mute myself. I couldn't stop laughing.
That was awesome. Okay, well, thanks again for joining us, guys.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, Chris, that was so much fun talking with Rumman and Brandon about crossover today. You know, it was interesting to see the different, perspectives we had on the episode. And of course, I'm really excited that we get new voices, here on Trek FM. This was Rumman's first time in the Ready Room. It was exciting to have her on. In general, it's been exciting to see this proliferation of new voices around the network these days.
Yeah, I totally agree. First of all, I'm glad that we didn't all love the episode or hate the episode, because we had, I think, an interesting discussion there, and we were able to move Rumman's rating up by a sequin and a half, which good job, Bishay, on that. But Rumman was wonderful. I was so happy that she was on the show, and just really, I love talking to people like Rumman, and I hope she's going to be back in the near future. Fantastic discussion today. I hope everyone enjoyed it, and I hope you'll share your thoughts with us on crossover. There are many ways that you can do that. On Twitter, our username is TrekFM. You can find us on Facebook in the Babel Conference. That's probably the best place to go to have a broader discussion, because that's how we extend our discussions from the podcasts to our audience. We have a large group there. Just type Babel, Babel, into the search field on Facebook, and it will come up. If you're not yet a member, you'll need to click join, because it is a closed group. But I hope you'll find us over there and join in the discussion. You can also send us an email if you go to trek.fm/contact. Just use the form that you find there and choose to send to a show, and choose the Ready Room, and that'll come to me by email. You can also send me a voicemail at speakpipe.com/trekfm. That's the word speak and the word pipe together, .com/trekfm, and I would love to hear your voice. Now, Zachary, when you're not, making your own sequin headbands for when you want to play the mirror version of yourself, where can people find you?
Well, you can find me as one half of Metatrek's Trek FM show on Star Trek and philosophy. I co-host that show with Mike Morrison. And if you want to get in touch with me on social media, you can find me on Twitter under the handle at Zachary Fruhling. It's just my name, ZACHARY-FRUHLING. And of course, you can find me in the Babel Conference if you want to talk about anything we talked about today or anything else we've talked about on Trek FM. And how about you, Chris? Where can people find you around social media and Trek FM these days?
Well, are you talking about me or Mirror Me?
Oh, Mirror You, of course. It's much more interesting that way. I wonder what Mirror Universe is up to.
It's funny because I have, my avatar in social media, except for Facebook, where I actually have a picture of myself. But everywhere else, I use these little illustrated characters of me that our former designer, Isaac Zamora, did a long time ago, because he used to work for my company. We used to work together all the time. I have many, many versions of those, and I have one of them where it's me in the Mirror Universe uniform, and I have a goatee. And so sometimes I'll put that up there if I'm going to be Mirror Me or Evil Chris. Now, the ironic part about it is that I actually have a goatee all the time. So really, I guess I should put up one without the goatee to be the opposite, right?
So wait a minute. Are you... Now I'm getting really skeptical. I'm not sure if it's really you or if this is some Mirror Universe view that crossed over years ago.
Years ago, and I've been here. I crossed over, I started the network, and I just stuck around. Yes, that's exactly right. So anyway, if you want to find me, I'm on Twitter. My username is CBrianJones, letter C and Brian with a Y. That's my username pretty much everywhere on social media. You'll also find me there in the Babel Conference on Facebook. And elsewhere on the network, you'll find me doing The Orb, our dedicated Deep Space Nine show with Matthew Rushing. We've actually talked about some of these Mirror Universe episodes on there, I'm pretty sure in the past. But if you love DS9, you're definitely going to love The Orb. Now, you do need to watch the entire series before you listen to The Orb, because we jump all over the place. It's for people who know the series from start to finish. But if that's you, I think you'll really love The Orb, so go check out that podcast. And then you can find my writing about Star Trek on the official website at StarTrek.com. Just go and search for my name there, and my articles will come up that way using 3 parts C. Brian Jones. That's the way to search for those, and those articles will come up there. Zachary, I'd like to take a moment to thank you, because you are an associate producer here of The Ready Room, but I'd also like to thank our other associate producers who help us get this show out to everybody. That includes Renee Roberts, Sam Piasek, Kay Elizabeth Janeway, Tim Robertson, and David Shuford. And on the last show we recorded, I forgot to mention David. So David, I apologize for forgetting you last time. Thank you so much for all of your support of the show and the network and helping me get the Ready Room out to everybody. So once again, Renee, Sam, Kay, Tim, David, and of course you, Zachary, thank you so much for being associate producers here of the Ready Room. If you would like to become an associate producer and support the network all at the same time, you can do that on Patreon. If you go to patreon.com/TrekFM, that's patreon.com/TrekFM, you can find out everything that you need to know over there. And the support that we get there really makes it possible for us to operate the network. We would not be able to bring our podcast to you without that help, because it costs such a lot of money these days to run the network. Our bandwidth is insane. Our bandwidth in July, Zachary, was 9.2 terabytes of data that we transferred in podcasts. Is really incredible. So that's over $1,000 right there just to pay for the bandwidth. So it's really, really up there. But we love doing it, and we thank everyone for their support. So please consider pitching in if you love the shows, not just this show, but all the shows on the network. And again, you'll find that at patreon.com/TrekFM. And there's also another way you can support us if you would like to get some really cool Trek merchandise in the process, and that's at our store on Redbubble. If you go to trekfm.store, that's the actual URL, trekfm.store, that will take you over there. We have amazing designs by our incredibly talented art director, Aaron Harvey, and you can get those on shirts. That's how most people order them, but you can also get them on other items like throw pillows. We've seen quite a few listeners who have tweeted us photos of their throw pillows, and those look beautiful. You can also get them on notebooks and stickers and phone cases and all sorts of different objects. And most of the money, of course, goes to production of the items, but we do get a little bit of money from that, and it helps us offset the costs of operating the network. But more importantly, it gives you a way to share Trek FM with people and enjoy being part of the network. And we all, as hosts, have these items ourselves as well. We buy them just like you do. We don't get them for free. We pay for them also. And it's just really fun. We have great stuff over there. So again, trekfm.store is the URL for that, and I hope you'll check that out too.
I love that the items in the Redbubble store are not just your run-of-the-mill Star Trek items. These are very clever, very amusing, very well-done art pieces from Aaron Harvey.
They really are. And speaking of what we talked about today, actually, we've got that Riker's dad and Pulaski shirt that Aaron did.
Pulaski banged Riker's dad, yes.
Exactly.
Don't forget.
That's a really great one. All right. So everyone, please go check that out. And I really do appreciate all of your support of the show. All right, Zachary. Well, I'm going to have to let you go. I have really got to run back down to the landing pad because I want to make sure I'm on that runabout when they head back through the wormhole, because I really don't want to hang out here in the Mirror Universe.
Sounds great, Chris. I was going to do the same thing, actually. I'm missing a goatee. I don't have a goatee like you, but like you, I got to get back to my own universe. But in the meantime, I think it's time to stick a Terran or a miner in it, because the Ready Room is done.